The massive crystalline doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a sound like thunder rolling across distant mountains. Ambassador Jake Morrison stepped through the threshold, his simple black suit a stark contrast to the impossible architecture surrounding him. The chamber stretched upward into darkness, its walls alive with shifting patterns of light that seemed to whisper secrets in languages older than Earth itself. Thousands of alien representatives filled the tiered galleries that spiraled impossibly high above the central floor. Each species occupied their designated section, and the air hummed with translation devices struggling to convert thoughts and concepts that had no human equivalent. Some beings floated in containment fields filled with exotic gases. Others existed as pure energy, their forms crackling with barely contained power. A few were so alien that looking directly at them caused Morrison's vision to blur and his mind to recoil. At the center of it all sat the 7 Primarchs, the eldest and most powerful species in known space. Each commanded territories spanning hundreds of star systems, and their combined influence shaped the destiny of countless worlds. Morrison had studied them obsessively during the 3-month journey to the Council Station, but seeing them in person made his preparation feel woefully inadequate. The Vorthak Primarch spoke first, its voice resonating through the chamber like metal grinding against stone. The translation device in Morrison's ear converted the alien harmonics into words that chilled his blood. Human designation Jake Morrison. You stand before the Galactic Council as representative of species classification 7 Alpha 9, commonly known as Homo sapiens of Sol 3. Morrison remained perfectly still, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Around him, the alien representatives watched with the detached interest of predators observing prey. He had known this moment would come ever since the first contact protocols had been established 6 months ago. Earth's existence could no longer be hidden, and the Council demanded answers. The Xerian matriarch leaned forward from her position among the 7. Her crystalline form caught the chamber's ambient light and threw it back in patterns that hurt to follow. Your species has been observed for exactly 147 standard cycles. During this time, you have exhibited concerning behaviors. A holographic display materialized in the space above Morrison's head, showing images that made his stomach clench. Nuclear weapons tests, environmental destruction, wars that had consumed entire continents. The worst moments of human history played out for an audience of beings whose technology could unmake solar systems. Aggressive expansion beyond your birth world, continued the Xerian matriarch, uncontrolled population growth, resource depletion on a planetary scale, and most concerning of all, the development of weapons capable of sterilizing your own biosphere. The Kreth overlord's tentacles writhed as it spoke, each movement generating patterns of bioluminescence that the translation device rendered as emotional undertones of disgust and concern. By every metric we use to evaluate emerging species, humanity represents a Category 5 existential threat to galactic stability. Morrison finally spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the vast space despite its impossible acoustics. Honored Primarchs, I understand your concerns. Humanity acknowledges that our development has been unconventional. A sound like breaking glass echoed from the galleries above, alien laughter from species that found the understatement amusing. The Torvan hierarch's multiple heads turned to focus on Morrison simultaneously, each one expressing a different aspect of predatory interest. Unconventional, the hierarch repeated, its voice a harmony of tones that suggested mockery. Your species achieved nuclear fission before developing sustainable energy. You reached your planet's moon while still maintaining economic systems based on scarcity. You decoded your own genetic structure while simultaneously driving other species to extinction through habitat destruction. More images flickered in the holographic display. This time they showed Earth's cities, teeming with billions of humans living in structures that defied the architectural principles of every other known species. The buildings seemed to grow organically, adapting and changing in response to needs that no rational civilization would have developed. And yet, Morrison said, pulling a small device from his jacket pocket, we're here. The device was simple, a metal cube no larger than his fist, its surface unmarked except for a small red button on one side. To the assembled representatives, of galactic civilization, it looked primitive, almost laughably so compared to the technology surrounding them. The Dylonian sage's energy field pulsed with colors that the translation device rendered as curiosity, mixed with condescension. You believe this crude artifact represents some form of achievement? Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the chamber. This device contains the complete genetic and cultural record of every species currently represented in this chamber. The silence that followed was profound. In the galleries above, thousands of alien forms went completely still. Even the energy beings stopped their constant fluctuation. The Vorthak Primarch's grinding voice carried a note of disbelief. Impossible. Our security measures are extensive, Morrison agreed. But you designed them to detect and prevent actions by species that think like you do. Species that follow logical development patterns. Species that build technology to solve problems in predictable ways. He held up the cube, letting the chamber's alien lighting play across its simple surface. Humans don't solve problems like other species. We don't think like other species. And we certainly don't develop technology like other species. The holographic display flickered and changed, now showing images of human technology that made several alien representatives recoil in their seats. Spacecraft built from materials that shouldn't have been able to exist. Computer systems that used biological components in ways that violated every known principle of engineering. Weapons that turned the laws of physics into suggestions rather than absolute rules. For the past 147 standard cycles, Morrison continued, while you've been watching humanity's concerning behaviors, humanity has been watching you, all of you, learning from you, taking apart your technology piece by piece and figuring out how to make it work in ways you never imagined. The Nexari Collective's 1,000 voices spoke in unison, their harmony carrying undertones of growing alarm. The quantum encryption protecting our databases requires computational power exceeding the total energy output of most stars, Morrison finished. Yes, we know. We also know that quantum encryption becomes vulnerable when you approach it from directions that quantum physics says shouldn't exist. He pressed the red button on the cube. Immediately, streams of data began flowing through the chamber's information networks, overriding security protocols that had protected galactic civilization for millennia. Personal communications, military, specifications, even the private thoughts of telepathic species are all of it laid bare for examination. The 7 Primarchs rose from their seats simultaneously, their combined presence filling the chamber with energies that would have reduced lesser beings to their component atoms. But Morrison stood his ground, his simple human form dwarfed by powers that could reshape reality itself. This is an act of war, the Vorthak Primarch declared, its voice now carrying harmonics that made the chamber's walls vibrate. Morrison shook his head slowly. No, honored Primarchs. This is an introduction. You wanted to know what humanity is capable of when we put our minds to something. Now you know. The data streams intensified, revealing secrets that some species had kept hidden for millions of years. Trade agreements that enslaved entire civilizations, scientific experiments that had consumed populated worlds, the careful manipulation of lesser species to maintain the balance of power that kept the 7 Primarchs in control. The question now, Morrison said, his voice cutting through the chaos erupting in the galleries above, is what you're going to do about it. The chamber fell silent once more, but this time the silence was heavy with the weight of a galaxy-spanning civilization suddenly realizing that the rules of existence had just changed forever. Morrison waited, the red cube still active in his hand, as the most powerful beings in known space tried to process the impossible reality that humanity had just presented to them. The data streams continued flowing through the Galactic Council's networks, each revelation sending ripples of shock through the assembled representatives. Ambassador Morrison watched as species that had maintained perfect diplomatic composure for millennia began showing signs of panic. In the highest galleries, several minor civilizations were already evacuating their representatives. Admiral Rebecca Torres materialized as a hologram beside Morrison, her image transmitted from somewhere beyond the Council Station's sensor range. Her uniform bore no insignia that any galactic database would recognize. and the ship behind her seemed to exist in a state of controlled chaos war technology that shouldn't work, but clearly did. "Status report, Admiral," Morrison said calmly, as if requesting morning coffee rather than intelligence that could reshape galactic civilization. Torres smiled, and there was something in that expression that made several of the energy beings in the upper galleries flicker nervously. "All primary targets have been compromised, Ambassador. We now have complete access to the communication networks of 437 major civilizations, real-time monitoring of 15,000 military installations, and direct interface capability with approximately 60% of all artificial intelligence systems in Council space." The Kreth Overlord's tentacles writhed in patterns that the translation systems rendered as profanity in 17 different languages. "Impossible. The quantum barriers alone would require thinking about quantum mechanics the way you do," Morrison interrupted. "Humans have a different approach. We don't accept that barriers exist until we've personally tried to break them, usually several times using methods that any sensible species would know are doomed to failure." A new hologram appeared beside Torres, a Dr. Lisa Park, whose appearance seemed oddly fluid, as if her molecular structure couldn't quite decide what it wanted to be. Behind her, glimpses of technology that hurt to look at directly suggested humanity had moved far beyond conventional physics. "The quantum barriers were indeed formidable," Dr. Park said, her voice carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. "But they were designed by minds that operate within predictable parameters. Human creativity has a tendency to ignore parameters altogether." The Xerian matriarch's crystalline form began resonating at frequencies that made the chamber's walls vibrate sympathetically. "Your species lacks the theoretical foundation to comprehend the technologies you claim to have compromised. The mathematical frameworks alone require cognitive architectures that evolved over millions of years of logical development," Dr. Park agreed, "which is exactly why they didn't work against us. Human cognitive architecture didn't evolve for logic. It evolved for survival in an environment where logic could get you killed." The holographic displays around the chamber shifted, now showing footage that made even the 7 Primarchs lean back in their seats. Human cities that moved like living organisms, ships that appeared to be grown rather than built, weapons that seemed to violate causality itself by destroying their targets before being fired. "Impossible," whispered the Torvan hierarch, its multiple heads focused on different aspects of the technological impossibilities being displayed. "These violate fundamental physical laws." Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out another device, this one looking like nothing more than a child's toy made from colorful plastic blocks. He tossed it casually into the air where it hung suspended, slowly rotating and emitting a soft humming sound. "Physical laws," Morrison said, "are really more like physical suggestions when you approach them from the right angle. Or in our case, from every wrong angle simultaneously until something works." The toy began to glow, and suddenly the massive chamber felt different. The air itself seemed thicker, more substantial, as if reality had become negotiable. Several of the alien representatives found themselves floating, despite the chamber's artificial gravity, while others discovered their energy fields were generating colors that didn't exist in any known spectrum. Admiral Torres gestured to something off-screen, and her hologram was joined by others. Captain Elena Vasquez, standing on what appeared to be the bridge of a ship that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Commander David Kim, surrounded by technology that seemed to be part machine, part biological organism, and part pure mathematics. Dr. Amanda Cross, whose laboratory appeared to contain captured pieces of stars, black holes, and other cosmic phenomena that no sane species would attempt to study at close range. "For 147 standard cycles," Admiral Torres said, "you've been cataloging humanity's development and finding it wanting by your standards. What you failed to realize is that we weren't developing according to your standards, we were developing according to our own." The Dylonian sage's energy field pulsed with colors that indicated deep confusion mixed with growing fear. "But development without logical progression leads to chaos. Civilization requires order, structure, predictable advancement along established pathways." Captain Vasquez laughed, and the sound carried undertones that made the translation systems struggle to find equivalent concepts. "You're absolutely right. Human development has been completely chaotic. We've built cities before we understood architecture. We've traveled to space before we figured out how to stop fighting each other. We've split atoms before we learned to live sustainably on our own planet. And that's exactly why we're here, Commander Kim added, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had learned to surf tsunamis of probability. While you've been following logical development trees, we've been cutting our own path through the forest of possibility. The holographic displays shifted again, this time showing star charts that made several alien mathematicians in the upper galleries begin calculating frantically. Red markers appeared throughout the galaxy, each one representing something that the Council's sensors hadn't detected despite their sophisticated monitoring networks. Every red marker, Dr. Cross explained, represents a human installation that your sensors can't detect because it exists in ways your physics says are impossible. Mining operations inside the cores of active stars, research stations in the spaces between dimensions, agricultural colonies growing food from the quantum foam itself. The Nexari Collective's 1,000 voices spoke in harmony, but for the first time in recorded history, that harmony carried notes of discord. The energy requirements alone would exceed the total output of our civilization by factors that assume energy works the way you think it does, Morrison interrupted. He gestured to the floating toy which was now surrounded by what appeared to be a miniature galaxy of swirling lights. Humans discovered early on that the universe is much more flexible than most species believe. You just have to be willing to push against the boundaries until they bend. The 7 Primarchs exchanged looks that would have ignited atmospheres on lesser worlds. Each of them commanded technologies capable of reshaping solar systems. But the humans were casually demonstrating capabilities that made such power seem primitive. The Vorthak Primarch's grinding voice carried a note of something that might have been respect. "What do you want from the Council?" Morrison smiled again, and this time there was nothing reassuring about the expression. "Want nothing. We're not here to ask for anything. We're here to inform you that the galaxy has just become a much more interesting place." "Inform us of what exactly?" demanded the Kreth Overlord. "That humanity has graduated," Admiral Torres said simply. "We've moved beyond being a species that reacts to galactic events. We've become a species that creates them." The chamber erupted in chaos as the implications of her words sank in. In the galleries above, representatives from hundreds of species began shouting in languages that the translation systems couldn't keep up with. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for diplomatic negotiations. A few simply called for evacuation. But the 7 Primarchs remained silent, their ancient minds trying to process a reality that their long experience had never prepared them for. For the first time in millions of years, they were facing something completely unpredictable. And in the center of it all, Ambassador Morrison stood calmly with his impossible toy spinning above his head, waiting to see how the galaxy's oldest powers would respond to the emergence of its newest player. The chaos in the Galactic Council chamber reached a crescendo, as species that had maintained diplomatic relations for millennia began openly threatening each other. In the upper galleries, the Silthari Consortium was demanding immediate evacuation protocols while the Draconic Assembly called for preemptive strikes against human settlements. The translation systems overloaded, creating a cacophony of linguistic chaos that would have driven most beings insane. Ambassador Morrison raised his hand, and the simple gesture somehow cut through the noise like a blade through silk. The floating toy above his head pulsed once, and suddenly every voice in the chamber fell silent, not because they chose to stop speaking, but because sound itself seemed to have forgotten how to propagate in the presence of whatever humanity had brought to this ancient seat of power. "Thank you," Morrison said, his voice the only sound audible in the vast space. "I realize this is a lot to process. After all, your species have spent millions of years assuming that development follows predictable patterns, that technology advances along logical pathways, that civilizations grow in ways that can be measured, cataloged, and controlled." The 7 Primarchs watched with the focused attention of predators who had suddenly realized they might be prey. The Vorthak Primarch's metallic form crackled with energy discharges that would have leveled cities. But the power seemed to dissipate harmlessly in the changed atmosphere of the chamber. Dr. Park's hologram gestured, and new displays materialized showing Earth as it existed now. Not the blue-green world that galactic databases remembered, but something far more complex. The planet appeared to exist in several dimensions simultaneously, its surface shifting between different states of reality like a living kaleidoscope. Earth is no longer just a planet, Dr. Park explained, her form becoming more fluid as she spoke. It's become a nexus point where multiple realities intersect. We discovered that consciousness itself can be used as a construction material when properly applied. The Syrian matriarch's crystalline structure began, resonating with frequencies that suggested profound distress. Consciousness cannot be manipulated in such ways. The fundamental nature of awareness itself prevents species that think about awareness the way you do from manipulating it. Commander Kim's hologram interrupted. But humans have never thought about consciousness the way other species do. We've always known that reality is negotiable. On the displays, images showed human settlements that defied every known principle of physics and engineering, cities that existed partially in hyperspace. Their buildings stretching through dimensions that mathematical models said couldn't support matter. Agricultural systems that grew food from pure thought, converting ideas into edible reality through processes that violated thermodynamics on a fundamental level. The Torvan hierarch's multiple heads turned to focus on different aspects of the impossible architecture being displayed. These structures, they should collapse under their own impossibility. Captain Vasquez's image flickered, revealing glimpses of the ship she commanded. A vessel that appeared to be constructed from crystallized time itself, its hull reflecting events that hadn't happened yet alongside memories of things that had never been. Impossibility, she said, is just another construction material once you learn how to work with it. Humans have always been good at building things that shouldn't work but do anyway. Admiral Torres gestured off-screen, and her hologram was joined by dozens of others, human commanders, scientists, and engineers standing on vessels and installations that showcased the true scope of humanity's transformation. Ships that sailed through the spaces between thoughts. Laboratories where scientists studied the fundamental equations that wrote reality itself. Military installations that defended against threats from dimensions that other species couldn't even perceive. While the Council has been monitoring our home system, Admiral Torres said, we've been expanding into territories that your sensors can't detect, because they exist in conceptual spaces rather than physical ones. We now have permanent settlements in approximately 40,000 locations that could generously be called real, and several million more in places that definitely aren't. The Dylonian sage's energy field pulsed with colors that indicated confusion so profound, it bordered on existential crisis. How do you maintain coherent civilization across non-existent territories? Dr. Amanda Cross materialized as a new hologram, her laboratory visible behind her containing what appeared to be the universe's fundamental constants held in glass containers like specimens. The same way we maintain coherent civilization anywhere else, we make it up as we go along and hope it works. She gestured to her impossible collection, and the chamber's occupants could see mathematical principles that governed reality itself, being casually manipulated like children's toys. Most species assume that universal constants are actually constant. Humans discovered that they're more like guidelines that can be adjusted if you know which laws of physics to ignore. The Kreth overlord's bioluminescent patterns flickered through spectra that suggested growing panic. You're describing the systematic destruction of causality itself. If fundamental constants can be adjusted, if consciousness can be used as construction material, if impossible structures can be built through applied paradox, then the universe becomes a much more interesting place, Morrison finished. Yes, that's exactly what we're describing. The toy floating above his head began to spin faster, and the chamber itself seemed to respond by becoming more than what it had been moments before. The walls showed glimpses of other chambers and other realities, where other versions of this conversation were taking place with different outcomes. Some showed the Council embracing humanity's approach and transforming into something unrecognizable. Others showed conflicts that consumed entire galactic clusters. A few showed scenarios where reality itself simply gave up and started over. The Nexari Collective's 1,000 voices attempted to speak in unison, but the harmony was broken by voices from alternate versions of themselves offering different perspectives. This level of reality manipulation, it threatens the stability of existence itself. Only if you assume that existence was stable to begin with, Commander Kim replied. Humans learned early that reality is much more fragile and flexible than most species want to admit. Once you accept that everything might be an illusion anyway, it becomes much easier to work with. The 7 Primarchs rose from their seats simultaneously. their combined presence filling the chamber with energies that should have been capable of rewriting local space-time. Instead, those energies seemed to become absorbed by the impossible architecture that humanity had subtly introduced to the chamber. The Vorthak Primarch's voice carried overtones of something that might have been fear. "What are your intentions regarding galactic civilization?" Morrison looked up at the towering figures that had commanded the galaxy for longer than most species had existed. His expression was that of someone delivering news that was neither good nor bad, but simply inevitable. "Our intentions," he said, "are to continue being human, to continue building impossible things, breaking unbreakable rules and turning should-be into is-so. Whether galactic civilization adapts to accommodate us or we have to build a new galaxy to accommodate ourselves, well, that's entirely up to you." The implications of his words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the chamber, the assembled representatives of galactic civilization began to realize that they were no longer discussing whether to integrate a new species into their existing order. They were deciding whether to evolve into something entirely new or become extinct in favor of something that had never existed before. The universe itself seemed to pause, waiting to see which direction causality would decide to flow. The silence that followed Morrison's declaration stretched across dimensions that hadn't existed before humanity entered the chamber. In the galleries above, representatives from hundreds of species found themselves frozen not by fear, but by the growing realization that the fundamental nature of existence was shifting around them like sand in an hourglass that had been turned upside down. The 7 Primarchs exchanged glances that would have ignited solar systems under normal circumstances. But these were no longer normal circumstances, and their ancient powers seemed diminished in the presence of whatever humanity had become. The Torvan hierarch spoke first, its multiple heads moving in patterns that suggested calculation beyond the scope of conventional mathematics. "You speak of building a new galaxy as if such a thing were merely an engineering challenge." Dr. Cross's hologram smiled, and behind her the laboratory containing fundamental constants seemed to expand into spaces that definitely didn't exist. "For us it is. We've already built 17 test galaxies in pocket dimensions. Most of them collapsed, but 3 are stable enough to support life, and 1 has actually started evolving its own physical laws. New displays materialized, showing structures that challenge the viewer's ability to process visual information, galaxies that existed inside containers no larger than dinner plates. Star systems arranged in geometric patterns that spelled out mathematical equations in languages that predated known civilization. Planets where time flowed backward and inhabitants lived their lives in reverse, growing younger until they dissolved into the possibility of their own births. The Dylonian sage's energy field flickered through colors that had no names in any known spectrum. But why? What drives a species to reshape reality itself? Commander Kim's image solidified, revealing more details of his impossible surroundings. Curiosity, boredom, the basic human refusal to accept that there are things we can't do. We started by asking what if, and discovered that the universe usually answers why not. Admiral Torres gestured to something beyond the range of her holographic projection, and suddenly the chamber was filled with the presence of beings that shouldn't have been able to exist. Humans who had transcended physical form entirely, existing as pure consciousness that could interface directly with the mathematical structures underlying reality. Others who had become living embodiments of natural forces, their personalities distributed across the electromagnetic spectrum itself. "Some of us chose to remain essentially human," Torres explained, as reality rippled around her words. "Others decided to explore what humanity could become if we removed certain limitations. Physical form, for instance, linear time, singular existence in only one universe at a time." The Zerion, matriarch's crystalline structure, began, resonating with frequencies that suggested her consciousness was fragmenting under the strain of processing impossible concepts. "But you're still recognizably human. How do you maintain species coherence across such radical transformation?" Dr. Park's form shifted, revealing aspects of herself that existed in dimensions the council chamber wasn't equipped to display. "We maintain what makes us human: our curiosity, stubbornness, the tendency to try things that shouldn't work. Everything else is just optional." Morrison walked closer to the 7 Primarchs, and with each step the chamber seemed to become more than it had been. The walls showed glimpses of other councils and other realities, where different versions of this conversation were reaching different conclusions. Some showed cooperation, others showed conflict. A few showed scenarios where the very concept of conflict had become obsolete. The question facing you, Morrison said, isn't whether you can stop us. At this point, stopping humanity would require unmaking the concept of creativity itself, and we've already established fallback positions in realities where that isn't possible. The Kreth overlord's tentacles writhed in patterns that suggested desperation, mixed with fascination. Then what choice do we have? The same choice humanity has always faced, Captain Vasquez replied, her ship becoming visible through the holographic display as a vessel that sailed between moments rather than through space. Adapt or become irrelevant. A new presence entered the chamber, not through the doors but by simply beginning to exist where it hadn't been before. The figure appeared human at first glance, but closer examination revealed aspects that human evolution had never developed. Dr. Marcus Wells had become something that was still recognizably human while simultaneously being something entirely new. Adaptation, Dr. Wells said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested he was speaking from multiple time periods simultaneously. Doesn't require abandoning what you are. It requires expanding what you might become. The displays around the chamber shifted to show the current state of species that had chosen to work with humanity rather than resist. The results were startling. Aurora civilizations that had stagnated for millions of years, suddenly experiencing rapid development along entirely new evolutionary paths. The Altarian collective had learned to exist as pure music, their consciousness distributed across harmonic structures that spanned light years. The Centauri Republic had discovered how to build cities from crystallized emotion, their architecture responding to the feelings of inhabitants in real time. Each species brings something unique to the collaboration, Dr. Wells continued. Your technological advancement, your stability, your accumulated wisdom. In return, we offer the chance to discover what lies beyond the boundaries you've spent millions of years accepting as absolute. The Vorthak Primarchs, metallic forms sparked with energy discharges that seem to be searching for something to destroy, but finding nothing vulnerable enough to affect. And if we refuse this, collaboration? Morrison's smile carried the patience of someone who had learned to think in geological time frames, while maintaining the urgency of a species that lived for mere decades. Then you'll have a front-row seat to watch evolution continue without you. The toy floating above his head pulsed again, and suddenly the chamber was filled with possibilities made manifest. Alternative versions of galactic civilization, where the Council had made different choices. Realities where they had embraced change and become something magnificent. Others where they had resisted and gradually faded into irrelevance as the universe moved on without them. The Nixari Collective's 1,000 voices attempted to speak in harmony but found themselves joined by voices from parallel versions offering different perspectives on the same questions. How can we trust a species that treats fundamental reality as a rough draft? The same way we trusted each other despite our differences, Admiral Torres replied. By recognizing that diversity of thought and approach makes all of us stronger than any of us could be alone. Dr. Cross gestured to her collection of universal constants, and the Council members could see mathematical principles that governed reality being carefully adjusted to create new possibilities. We're not asking you to abandon your nature. We're offering to help you discover what your nature could become if you remove the limitations you've imposed on yourselves. The 7 Primarchs stood in a circle, their ancient minds communing through channels that had been used for interspecies communication since before most current civilizations had evolved. The weight of their decision pressed against reality itself, causing ripples that propagated through dimensions humanity had yet to explore. Finally, the Torvan hierarch spoke for all of them. What guarantees do we have that this evolution will preserve what we value about our civilizations? Morrison looked up at the beings who had shaped galactic history for longer than humanity had existed, and his expression carried the infinite optimism of a species that had never learned to accept impossibility. The same guarantee humanity has always lived with, he said. None whatsoever. But isn't that what makes it interesting? The chamber held its breath as the most powerful beings in known space contemplated a future that none of their vast experience had prepared them to understand. The moment of decision arrived like a quantum event, verse existing in all possible states, until observation collapsed it into reality. The 7 Primarchs stood in their circle of communion, their ancient minds processing implications that stretched across timescales most species couldn't comprehend. Around them, the chamber itself seemed to hold its breath, the very air shimmering with potential futures waiting to be born. The Vorthak Primarch spoke first, its metallic voice carrying notes of resignation mixed with something that might have been anticipation. In our existence spanning millions of cycles, we have witnessed the death of stars, the birth of galaxies, and the rise and fall of civilizations beyond counting. Never have we faced a choice that would fundamentally alter the nature of existence itself. Morrison waited patiently, the impossible toy still rotating above his head like a miniature sun that cast shadows in directions that shouldn't have existed. Around him, the holographic representatives of humanity's transformed civilization stood ready to implement whatever decision the Council reached. The Xerian matriarch's crystalline form began to change, its internal structure shifting to accommodate new patterns of thought. "We accept," she said, and the words sent shockwaves through the assembled representatives. "Not because we trust you, but because remaining unchanged in a universe that is transforming around us would be another form of extinction." The reaction was immediate and chaotic. In the galleries above, some species began celebrating while others protested violently. The Draconic Assembly's representative roared challenges in frequencies that shattered crystal formations throughout the chamber. The Silthari Consortium began transmitting distress signals that propagated across hyperspace channels. But beneath the chaos, something else was happening. The fundamental structure of galactic civilization was beginning to shift. Dr. Wells stepped forward, his transdimensional presence somehow calming the turbulence of emotions and thoughts swirling through the chamber. "The transformation doesn't happen all at once," he explained, his voice carrying reassurance across multiple probability spectrums simultaneously. "We learned from our own experience that forced evolution leads to chaos. Guided evolution, however, leads to possibilities none of us could imagine alone." The Torvan hierarch's multiple heads nodded in a complex pattern that suggested acceptance tinged with nervous excitement. "What does this collaboration entail, practically speaking?" Captain Vasquez gestured, and her timeship became visible in the chamber's viewing systems as something that existed partially in the past, present, and future simultaneously. "It starts with exchanges. Your scientists work with ours to explore questions that neither of us could answer alone. Your technologies merge with ours to create tools that transcend what either approach could achieve independently." Admiral Torres pointed to displays showing the current state of human integrated civilizations, and the results were breathtaking. Species that had been locked in evolutionary stagnation for eons were suddenly developing capabilities that defied their own previous understanding of their limitations. The Altarians discovered they could exist as living music, Torres explained. The Centauri learned to build architecture from crystallized emotion. The Volans found they could navigate not just through space, but through possibility itself. Dr. Park's fluid form gestured to her own transformation, showing how humanity's approach to consciousness manipulation had allowed her to exist simultaneously as individual and collective awareness. Each species brings unique perspectives that expand what all of us can become. Your telepathic capabilities, combined with our reality manipulation techniques, could lead to forms of communication that transcend the barriers between individual minds while preserving personal identity. The Dalonian sage's energy field pulsed with colors that indicated growing interest mixed with cautious optimism. "And what of our territories? Our existing civilizations? They become laboratories," Dr. Cross answered, her collection of universal constants now expanding to include principles that the Council's species had discovered but never thought to modify. "Testing grounds for new forms of existence. Your worlds, combined with our dimensional engineering, could become spaces where entire populations explore what they might become without risking what they already are." Morrison walked among the 7 Primarchs, and with each step, the chamber became more than the sum of its parts. "We're not offering conquest or absorption. We're offering partnership in the greatest experiment ever attempted. The conscious evolution of intelligence itself beyond the boundaries that physics, biology, and conventional wisdom have imposed." The Kreth Overlord's bioluminescent patterns shifted through spectra that suggested deep consideration. But what becomes of the natural order? The systems that have maintained stability for millions of years? They become the foundation for something greater, Commander Kim replied, his surroundings revealing glimpses of human settlements that existed in stable chaos, always organized randomness, that somehow produced results more elegant than the most carefully planned civilizations. Stability isn't abandoned, it's expanded to include possibilities that stable systems never could have accessed. The Nexari collective's thousand voices began harmonizing with voices from parallel realities where this decision had already been made, creating a chorus that spanned dimensions. We see the potential. We also see the risks. How do we ensure that transformation doesn't become destruction? Dr. Wells gestured to displays showing the careful protocols humanity had developed through trial and error across multiple reality frameworks, through what we call evolutionary insurance policies. For every transformation we attempt, we maintain backup realities where the original versions continue to exist. No species risks permanent loss of what they value most about themselves. The toy above Morrison's head began to pulse in rhythm with the heartbeats of everyone in the chamber, synchronizing biological and technological processes that had never been meant to work together. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of us suspected, Morrison said. Working together, we can explore possibilities that none of us could reach alone. One by one, the 7 Primarchs began to change. Not the dramatic physical transformation that marked humanity's evolution, but something subtler. A shift in the very nature of their existence that made them more than they had been while remaining recognizably themselves. The Vorthak Primarch's metallic form began incorporating elements that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The Xerian Matriarch's crystalline structure started resonating with frequencies that carried thoughts and emotions, rather than just information. The Torvan Hierarch's multiple heads began seeing through eyes that perceived probability as clearly as light. Around the chamber, representatives from hundreds of species watched as their leaders took the first steps into an uncertain, but infinitely promising future. Some followed immediately, eager to explore what they might become. Others hesitated, preferring to observe before committing to transformation. But none chose to flee because the possibilities being revealed were too magnificent to abandon. Welcome, Morrison said, as the chamber itself began evolving into something that was simultaneously a place and a process, a meeting ground and a launching point for expeditions into uncharted territories of existence, to the next phase of galactic civilization. The 7 Primarchs, now 7 pioneers, looked out at a universe that had suddenly become infinitely larger and more interesting than they had imagined. For the first time in millions of years, they faced a future that couldn't be predicted, planned, or controlled. And for the first time in their vast existence, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than threat. Humanity had indeed stormed the Galactic Council. But in the end, they hadn't conquered Adidao. They had liberated it from the constraints of what civilization was supposed to be, opening doorways to discover what it could become. The age of impossible possibilities had begun, and the universe itself seemed eager to see what would emerge from the collaboration between species that had learned to accept limitations, and the one species that had never learned that. Limitations were real. Reality held its breath and prepared to evolve.